Iowa's riding a 6-game winning streak going into the 2021 campaign. They have concluded spring sessions there in Iowa City, and we will track the Hawkeyes with Corey Bratta. You can catch him right here on YouTube and also his audio podcast from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Corey, how we doing today?
Doing great. Spring football has wound down, Mark, and we seem to be counting down the hours. I think as Iowa fans, we start to count down the hours once we hit June. So we got one more month, and then we'll start talking about summer and of course fall camp. So I'm excited. Let's talk football.
Yeah, let's do it. And again, this Iowa team looked good down the stretch last season. Looked good at the NFL draft for the most part, and those are losses, of course, that you don't like to see, but at the same time, a good look for the program going forward in regards to recruiting talent and showing prospective athletes that they can move on to the next level. So getting back to that spring finale in Iowa, what grabbed your attention?
Well, I think spring practice, as an Iowa fan, born and raised, and again, this is, literally born and raised in central Iowa, we've come to expect spring practice is sort of there's a few certain things that you want to make sure you avoid, and a few things that if you see, you're obviously pleasantly surprised. One of the big things is the offense is always going to underperform the defense. If it doesn't, that's a huge, huge problem in my mind. And I don't remember the last time we saw an Iowa offense look good during spring practice, and honestly, even look good on Kids Day, which usually takes place in August. And I would say the same thing this year. Spencer Petras, and I know that we're supposed to be promoting Iowa football. I was not particularly blown away by Petras' play yesterday. We're recording this on Sunday, the day after the last spring practice, which was open to the public and to the media. I was not blown away by his performance yesterday, and I wasn't particularly impressed with his performance 2 weeks prior. With that being said, again, you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt. This is typically what we see out of Iowa quarterbacks. I also have to kind of place an asterisk on that, though. Again, people want this program to go to the next level, and I know we talked about it last time we sat down and talked Hawkeye football. If you're going to do that, you're going to need to have a guy like C.J. Beathard, who, although he's not a Heisman contender, he was never a Heisman favorite or even a Maxwell finalist or anything like that. But here's a guy who's playing in the NFL. You're going to need a guy who can lead you from game 1 to game 12. And actually, Beathard was not particularly impressive in spring ball either. But again, that's probably the ceiling you're looking at with Petras. And so I just wasn't particularly impressed. He still seems to, his throws tend to be obviously a little bit too much voltage, if you will. His touch seems to be lacking. Certainly his crossing route throws are not the most accurate. But I will say this, it was impressive to me, receiver after receiver after receiver, when we heard him throughout our spring and media availability, they all talked about his improvement. So, again, you get a tiny snapshot into the cumulative number of practices that we get. And again, most of them we can't see. And I think, too, part of what has shaped my perception of what Petras did this spring and what we saw, the number of injuries Iowa is dealing with right now. And Mark, you talk to people all over the country. Maybe you can give me some insight on injury lists. I don't remember at Iowa this many guys being out for both spring practices. Now, normally Iowa just has one, or they used to just have one open to the general public, and then for a while they'd go over to Des Moines and have a spring practice at West Des Moines Valley Stadium, and then have one back at Kinnick. But 2 spring practices, and they hardly got anybody back from the injury list from 2 weeks prior. So that, I think, affected both sides of the football. Is that something for you, Mark, that is you hear from other guys around the country that it's a laundry list of guys that are hurt in the spring, or is that sort of an outlier?
There's a laundry list of what the number of guys that are being held out of spring games, but then I follow up with the writers, and it's typically in the range of 15 guys that get held out of the spring game, and rarely have I heard of any of those players that if it was game week that they would be held out, that it's just precautionary and there are no concerns.
So here's the list I have for Iowa fans that, care about the current depth chart, which obviously will change a lot. Justin Britt was out yesterday. Nico Reganey, Tyrone Tracy, Dane Belton, who's the starting cash / linebacker / safety. Matt Hankins, Xavier Williams, the transfer from Northern Iowa. I know there were several defensive linemen. I didn't even, again, this is probably not covering everybody. See here. I saw an interesting tweet from a good friend of mine, Tom Kakert, who does HawkeyeReport.com. From his, again, just his glance, he felt like there were more defensive linemen who were out than defensive linemen who were suited up. And Iowa doesn't have a formal. I mean, this was not a spring game, if you will. Like, I know Nebraska, and a lot of universities, like you mentioned, have formal spring games. This isn't really a spring game. These are just open practices. So I don't think it's a Ferentz move to necessarily hold guys out if they're healthy. So there are guys who are really dinged up. Ivory Kelly Martin's a guy who's probably not going to see the field. He needs to see the field. I mean, he's the guy now with Mekhi Sargent out as far as a running back too. They need him for depth this year at running back. He probably won't be back until at least August because he tore his ACL. Y.A. Black is a guy who is banged up right now. We didn't get really anything out of him as far as spring ball because of an injury, and he's a guy who's projected to be a starter on that defensive line. You got to remember they're replacing Alaric Jackson on the left side at left tackle, who surprisingly went undrafted over the weekend. Thankfully, Jack Plum seems to be healthy. He looked good. Again, I'm not an offensive line guru. He looked good over the weekend. It's just weird. I don't remember a year where this many injuries was affecting this many players. I will say on a positive note, and I don't remember if when we recorded the first time early spring, if this was even a comment, but Josiah Meeman, who is one of Iowa's backup tight ends, I was pretty high on heading into the spring, got into trouble with the law, basically, according to the police report, got into a fight at a bar, took off, the police ran him down. It just didn't look good. And I mean, again, and maybe I was, pushing a panic type narrative, but I thought he was done after reading that police report. Just it just didn't look good for a guy who wasn't even on the current depth chart. He came back and played yesterday, and I thought that was really good as far as potentially his character for Kirk to get him back on the field that quickly. I thought that was a good sign for the tight end room. Luke Lachey is another guy who is back now and is playing. So I think the injuries were concerning, but you have to understand that this is football, and you're going to get guys who are banged up. And so, we'll just wait and see. You got to put a grain of salt on everything Iowa football this time of year.
We are talking Iowa football, yes, with Corey Bratta. You can catch him right here on YouTube and also his audio podcast from the Hawkeye of the Storm. And as soon as you were describing the many issues downfield throwing the football from Spencer Petras, it brought to mind the comments that I heard from the analysts on ESPN when Amir Smith-Marset was drafted, and they were talking the pluses and minuses, and they said something to the effect of, we would have liked to have seen the quarterback get him the ball. If he wouldn't have thrown behind him and in the dirt and everything else, we probably would have seen more plays out of him. And I immediately thought of you and thought of our conversation coming up. And you pretty much depicted it. And
I think that's look, this team, as any team in college football, is going to be shaped. They're going to be shaped by his development. Again, there's going to be a ceiling either way with this Iowa offense and how it's run. But he is just going to. I don't know what it is. He's going to have to figure out a way to rein things in. He's, first of all, you mentioned Smith-Marset. You lose him, then you also lose a huge target on the outside, Brandon Smith, who didn't get drafted, but I could see making the Dallas Cowboys roster and got signed as a free agent yesterday. So you lose two huge pieces there, and they do have some depth. I mean, I like what they have at wide receiver. Everybody likes to talk wide receiver, running back at spring. I don't really pay a whole lot of attention to those two positions, again, because the defense just dominates this time of year anyways. And I think those guys are going to make their biggest strides they tend to during fall camp. Tyrone Tracy really exploded, but again, he didn't play in the second practice. We didn't see Nico Reganey in the second practice. Those two guys will be wide receiver 1 and 2. Keegan Johnson, I mentioned him, I believe, the last time we talked. Here's a guy who originally committed to Nebraska, or actually, I don't know that he actually committed to Nebraska. I think everybody had basically assumed he was Nebraska. He was from Nebraska, ended up going to Iowa. True freshman, enrolled early, along with Arlen Bruce, who is another kid that really exploded his senior year in high school after he transferred up to Ankeny. Those two guys, there's been a lot of really, really positive talk around them. They both performed well in spring practice. I was particularly impressed with Keegan Johnson. If there was one skill position player that I would say stood out other than your starters, Sam Laporta at tight end, Tyrone Tracy in that first practice, it would be Keegan Johnson. He's a guy who's 6'1", so he provides a little bit more height than a Nico Reganey, Tyrone Tracy, or even an Arlen Bruce. So I don't know that he fits into the X mold as far as what Iowa needs as a replacement to Brandon Smith. I think Desmond Hudson is another guy. I mean, 6'3", just a huge guy. Could see him playing tight end someday in the NFL, potentially. Obviously, that's a long ways off, but I kind of view him as the type of guy that needs to really develop for Iowa to succeed in, again, to have a guy that fits the Brandon Smith mold. I don't know, and maybe I'm overemphasizing the need for a big guy on the outside, but Iowa seems to, my biggest concern with wide receivers right now is they've got a lot of guys who fit into the slot mold, who are, 5'10", 5'11", maybe 6 foot, but do you have a guy on the outside that can, jump over a guy and make a play in the corner of the end zone like Brandon Smith did so often last year? So Keegan Johnson looked good. Desmond Hudson looked okay. It's hard too because, a guy like Desmond Hudson, who's so far down the ladder right now, he's getting throws from Alex Padilla, Connor Kapisak, and Deuce Hogan, who are just, I mean, you're just not going to be able to really get a good read on him. So yeah, we'll see. I think wide receiver is a position that's certainly flashy, but I'm liking the depth right now if you can get one of those guys to emerge as that X type receiver.
We've got Corey Brett on the line. You see his podcast there in the banner right there from the Hawkeye of the Storm, whether it's audio or video. You can catch him right here on YouTube or on your favorite audio platform. And of course, like, comment, share the videos out here on social media, and please subscribe right here. Our aim is the best discussion, debate, and analysis of college football. So please join us just about every day. All right, Corey. So considering that the aforementioned Alaric Jackson is arguably the most decorated player from the 2020 edition, and the highest drafted player was on the defensive line, will those two units that are typically strengths project to be stellar vintage Iowa offensive and defensive lines this year?
Well, defensive line, I just don't worry about. I mean, they lost, Chauncey Golston went a lot higher in the draft than I anticipated. I know a lot of Cowboys fans weren't happy with that selection. I don't tend to doubt the ability of any Iowa lineman making it at the next level. So I think if you're a Dallas fan, maybe pump the brakes on that and just wait and see what happens. Dallas doesn't have typically a very good run defense that they have in recent times. So he's going to help in that respect. As far as what Iowa has returning, I feel like they're a little undersized on the outside, unless, of course, somebody emerges on the inside and you slide a guy like John Wagner outside. I saw Iowa running John Wagner a lot inside and out over the course of those two practices. He's a big guy. I liked what I saw from big number 92 there. You've got Noah Shannon, who's a big body inside, who's going to be a gap filler, if you will. Again, Joe Evans, really small, more of a pass rush prototype, but looked really good. I'd say of any of the defensive linemen that stood out to me would probably be Wagner and Evans. Van Valkenburg is going to be the guy that needs to stay healthy. He's, his decision to come back was just massive because they did lose a lot, and not just with Chauncey Golston, but Davion Nixon, who slid a lot further in the draft than I anticipated. So I don't worry about defensive line. Offensive line is more of a concern to me. I know people think Kirk Ferentz is this offensive line guru, which I get it. He has produced a lot of offensive linemen and tight ends that end up succeeding at the next level. The problem with that narrative, though, is, I think we talked about this last time too. 2018, or was it 2019? I believe it was 2019. Iowa had a chance to be, I thought, pretty darn good with a senior quarterback in Nate Stanley and really good skill position players. I mean, really good skill position players with Amir Smith-Marset, Brandon Smith, Mekhi Sargent, Tyler Goodson. But they could not protect Nate Stanley for anything, and it was all the interior of the line. I don't want to throw the Paulson twins under the bus, but they were very subpar as seniors, and that was a little bit confuddling to me because that's just not how you expect Iowa offensive linemen to progress. And again, they could not protect Nate Stanley for anything. So I think it will be interesting to see. It will be interesting to see if you can develop more guys on the interior. Kyler Schott's a guy who I know the coaches are big on right now at guard. He's a little bit undersized, but his big thing is he can get better leverage, which, Austin Blythe is doing it right now in the NFL as a smaller offensive lineman, is succeeding, was really good with the Rams and now is with the Chiefs. So maybe Kyler Schott can kind of fit that mold. The biggest announcement in the offseason, even bigger than the Van Valkenburg return, was the return of Tyler Linderbaum. With him at center, with Schott potentially to his right, Justin Britt potentially to his left. You've got Jack Plum now, who's shifted over to left tackle, where Alaric Jackson had been occupying for 4 years. And then again at right tackle, that's sort of one of those things. I don't know who you're going to see at right tackle. I think that's still up in the air. There have been a number of guys that have rotated in and out, but again, we've had a lot of guys who are hurt. But if they can find somebody at right tackle, I don't tend to worry about right tackle either. I'm kind of gun shy from 2 years ago about guard play. Cody Ince, maybe he plays tackle, but he was more of a guard last year and a really darn good one. So I hate to almost throw a really elite guard out to tackle and then you suffer on the interior. And as you know, quarterbacks, if they're crafty, can deal with outside pressure. But when you get pressure up the middle, it's over. And especially with a guy like Spencer Petras, who, like it or not, is not Justin Fields and is not going to be able to make plays with his feet. So I think, to me, guard play is more important than outside line play. So yeah, I'm not the guru. They've got George Barnett now, the new offensive line coach, who maybe has different philosophies than Coach Polasek did. But again, they're all working under the umbrella of Kirk Ferentz, and I know Kirk Ferentz wants to play the best guys at his positions. So I would guess that it'll be Cody Ince at right tackle. So we'll just have to see on guard play. That would be my biggest concern. It's been my biggest concern now for 3 years. I said it earlier. I'll say it again. I think the roster they have in place and the depth they have in place, there's a couple positions. Running back, of course, is a position where you got to develop depth. Tight end 2 is huge. Is it going to be Luke Lachey, Josiah Miamin, Elijah Yelverton? Got to get somebody in there at tight end 2. I don't worry about defense, especially at corner right now with the strength they have in returners with Moss and Hankins. Quarterback play and then depth at those skill positions. And I would throw a wide receiver in there as well, although I'm more confident there. If you can get that, this team has a chance to be like a 2009, 2015, where nobody's really talking about them and then they explode, as opposed to the teams that, 2010, 2016, where everybody's, placing them in the top 10, top 15, and then they flub. So yeah, I'm liking where things are going right now, but it's still really early. And some of these younger guys can get in the weight room this summer, will certainly help their cause to get on the field this fall.
Was that last Big Ten championship in 2002?
2002.
Ohio State.
Yeah, and let's remember that 2009. Well, 2009. I mean, I guess you guys win it every year, so maybe it just is mixed in with all the other ones, Mark. But
went down to a kick.
Yeah, 2000. I love Sean McDonough, but I hate that call on that final kick. It was one of the more annoying calls.
Relive it for us. What was so distinctive about that kick and that call to that kick?
I just remember him screaming like Ohio State had never won a championship before. It just, you got to remember, Ricky Stanzi didn't play in that game. So you have James Vandenberg, who was absolutely spectacular. He takes a sack in the overtime, which is the biggest no-no, as you know, in an overtime game in college football. You don't ever take a sack on any down. He takes a sack. Iowa misses the field goal, and Iowa's defense was pretty stout the next series against Ohio State, but it wasn't enough. I can't remember who was the kicker. Do you remember the kicker in 2009 for Ohio State that made that final kick?
2009. Oh my goodness, I should be able to come up with this, but I'm not.
I don't even remember who
in 2009.
Yeah, 2009.
Wow, that's crazy. As soon as I see the name,
But yeah, that was about
myself in the head.
That was definitely as close as Iowa has been. 2015. I guess I shouldn't say that. 2015, they were pretty freaking close too.
Yeah,
I mean,
about a half a yard,
right? So I guess I can't. Thanks for making me relay that memory, Mark.
Well, I heard I just heard the comment that Hawkeye fans would bypass some of this NFL draft success for a Big Ten championship.
That's right.
And then I thought, when was the last time? It must have been 2002 when they tied the national champion Ohio State Buckeyes. There, Ohio State comes up again. And actually in that 2009 game, that was a back-to-back situation in which Iowa took Ohio State to the brink. The other game was in Iowa City.
Yes.
And Terrell Pryor pulled out like a 4th and 15 miracle in which the Hawkeyes were that close to defeating Ohio State and taking the Big Ten championship that year.
Those are just two of the many moments in Iowa history that, just paint Iowa fans over and over and over again. I think of the 2010 fake punt for Wisconsin in Kinnick. That one was just, that might be the most painful. For me, it was probably 2015, though. I mean, just to allow that long, exhausting drive. I mean, you watch the replay of that, and one of Iowa's backups, Melvin Spears, one of their backup linebackers, what's his face? The young guy who was it that scored that
LJ Scott, right?
LJ Scott, yeah. And he puts the ball over the goal line, and Spears went low. Had he went high, that ball was popping out, and Iowa won that game. So, yeah, you just, you relay these memories over and over again. But yeah, you're right. It's been way too long for Iowa as far as football or basketball to win a Big Ten title. So who knows? I mean, I'm not real high in Wisconsin. I think we talked about the schedule last time. I'm not real high in Wisconsin. Northwestern, I think a lot of Iowa fans were praying that Fitz, that Fitz would end up taking a job in the NFL. I think that was sort of the hope, because he seems to be a thorn in the sides of many Iowa or many Big Ten fans, not just Iowa fans. But he's back, so they'll be strong. I'm just not real. I just don't know what to make of the rest of the West. Certainly, your Buckeyes are going to be right there at the end. But yeah, I don't know. Iowa seems to perform well with the odds against them when nobody's talking about them. And so who knows? Maybe this will be the year. They've got a quarterback who's, if you're going to you look at this with rosy colored glasses, he's got a big arm. He's got a lot of talent. He's got experience now. He's got good skill position players around him. Not great. He had better skill position players around him last year. The name we didn't talk about was Tyler Goodson, who could be, a first team, I think could be a first team all Big Ten running back this year. So, I mean, when's the last time we've been able to say that? It would have been 2008 with Sean Green. So, I mean, if they're predicated on the run, they've got pieces in place to be really, really good. I just think it's just like the basketball season. As I talk about this, we're just about a month and a half out from Iowa's pathetic display against Oregon in the NCAA tournament. We're just I think Iowa fans are just kind of used to getting your hopes up, and then in a very as dramatic a fashion as possible, getting stabbed right in the heart. One of the other games that really comes to mind, Mark, and maybe you remember this, was the 2017. This was early in the season, but Iowa was 3-0. Penn State was 3-0, which I know 3-0 is not anything to brag about, but that team felt like it had something and ended up having a really impressive year. I mean, your Buckeyes know all about 2017 Iowa, but that was the year too where Saquon Barkley went all Superman and had 250, 300 all-purpose yards in that game. And again, another long, exhausting drive. Trace McSorley throws the pass in the end zone to Juwan Johnson over inches from Amani Hooker's outstretched hands. That's just what happened. It's just what happens to Iowa fans. So, I mean, I guess we'll wait for that to happen this year.
That was one of those, had it been capped off with a victory with one more stop, was a perfect Iowa formula against a pretty dynamic team and, of course, dynamic player in Saquon Barkley, where Iowa was outplayed for much of the first half, made a couple plays near the end of the half. I remember they had a interception around midfield that was brought back, and they scored a late touchdown to take a lead, low scoring in the teens. And of course, yes, they took it all the way down to the last play.
Yeah, a couple big plays to Akram Wadley. He just busted a couple, and you're right that when you can play a team like it's and it always happens on at a night game on ABC. It's always this way where Iowa plays a team, in the teens. And yeah, Akram Wadley made a couple big plays. I remember Nick Easley had a big touchdown in that first half that kind of, put Iowa in the game, which it seemed like that, they were getting, if you look at the stat sheet, I don't remember the exact numbers, but I mean, they were killing Iowa. But as far as bend don't break, if that's the philosophy, Iowa was pulling that off to a T, because I think, Barkley had like 250 yards in that game. So, I mean, the formula to win at Iowa is to be really good defensively. And so that's why, people are worried about the defense this year. I don't really worry about it. I think that the biggest key is, can you protect Petrus, and can he take the next step? And as much as people want to act like he has already, I have not seen it. So we'll just wait and see. I guess I'm just sour on past performances.
Well, Corey, I'm going to give Iowa fans one more additional glimmer of hope when it comes to Spencer Petrus's performance, because I think if you ask the typical college football fan, even a ardent Big Ten fan, who had a better season, who was a better performer last year, Graham Mertz or Spencer Petrus, in putting the two teams head to head, considering if you believe that Wisconsin and Iowa are the primary contenders in the Big Ten Western Division, well, just because of that 5-star status and the 20 for 21 showing with the 5 touchdowns out of the gate for Graham Mertz, everyone assumed, okay, this kid's for real. Bam, he's great. 20 for 21, 5 touchdowns. Didn't pay a whole lot of attention to what happened after that, where Petrus came out of the gate. And even though he didn't have a great season overall, he did improve. His rough outings were early, and he outplayed Mertz down the stretch and outplayed him head to head in the big 21-point win.
Yeah, I mean, Mertz, that performance was against Illinois. So, we all live in the moment. I mean, I think I remember watching that game thinking, my God, like this would only happen for Wisconsin. This is just the perfect situation for Wisconsin. But you're right. I mean, I think they would have been better with Jack Cohn last year. I don't know why I say that, but Graham Mertz sort of fell apart. So we'll see. I mean, he could progress. I mean, I don't pay too many attention to the star ratings of these recruits, but he certainly got the talent to take that team to the next level. I think the big thing for Iowa and Petrus is what we saw last year was an exceptionally good running game. And I know Iowa is sort of predicated on run-first offense, but if you look back at the numbers in the Kirk Ferentz era, there are, and I can count them on one hand, Mark, very few years where Iowa averages more than 3.5 yards a carry, maybe 4 yards a carry. So that's not elite. I mean, it's just not elite. Iowa likes to run the ball a lot. That's true, but they don't really run the ball well consistently. So, last year was different, though. I mean, Mekhi Sargent and Tyler Goodson were absolutely spectacular from game 1 to game, 8, whatever it was. And so, if you can get consistency in the run game, you're right about Petrus. He improved as the year went on, but he never had to be great, and they still rattled off 6 straight wins. So if they can be great. Now, I also wonder a little bit with last year, and I haven't delved into the numbers nationally or in the Big Ten, but I wonder how much the lack of spring ball last year and certainly the weird lead up to the condensed fall camp, if you want to call it that, I wonder what that did defensively for a lot of, the Big Ten. I just wonder because I have not seen that much consistency, especially from the interior of the line, probably since Kirk Ferentz was here. I mean, maybe, early on in Kirk Ferentz era, years, especially 2002, 2004, they dealt with a lot of injuries, but they found a way to still put up respectable numbers. I think that's sort of why Kirk Ferentz has his reputation. But yeah, if they can get consistent play out of Tyler Goodson, certainly his health is of utmost importance. And then you can play well on the inside of that line and keep Tyler Linderbaum healthy. Yeah, I think depth is the biggest issue everywhere, and probably a lot of teams would say that. But for Iowa, depth is the biggest issue everywhere. But yeah, if you can take some pressure off of Petrus and not force him to be great, the team actually can be great, even if Petrus is not. I don't know that they can take it to the next level where you're competing with an Ohio State in a Big Ten title game, but you can certainly get there, especially given where we're at with the rest of the West.